Okay, thanks for coming. My name's Adrian Strahan. I've been an indie since 2004. I wasn't sort of always an indie. Since then, I've done various things in those 12 years. But the common name for it really is an indie now. But before I became an indie, I graduated in 1987. I was a developer. I worked my way up to the dizzying heights of an IT manager. And since 2004, I've worked for myself. I've worked as a partner. I've worked in a consultancy role. I've been an employee, an employer, various things. I sort of flitted around all the time. So hopefully, what I'm going to talk to you about today is my experiences since becoming an indie in 2004. I'm just a quick straw poll. How many of you guys are indies at the moment? So we've got a couple. How many want to be indies? Okay. Majority of you want to become an indie. That's good. Well, let me first of all sort of explain what I've done. So since 2004, I tried to specialise as a GIS, as a geographical information systems guy, and that was really based originally on the back of doing some work on web apps and some work in that area. But in 2010, I got my first iPhone, and the rest is history. I guess we're all there, really. So first question is why become an indie? Maybe you're frustrated with your current work. Maybe you're in a project team and nobody's listening to you. Maybe you don't have the freedom to do what it is you think needs to be done. Maybe you think you can do it better. But equally, maybe you want to specialise in something that you really enjoy doing, and you just don't get that opportunity right now. And maybe, and this is what happened to me, there comes a now or never moment. And just to sort of explain how I became an indie, previous to we'll go on to the next slide. Previous to 2004, I worked for a company that created environmental reports for environmental professionals, and we worked with maps. We worked specifically with historical maps in order to identify historical land use problems. So, for example, you may have a map that was 100 years old, and it would have a quarry marked on it, but in the present day, there's no sign of that quarry. So it's useful to look at the historical map, that there was something there that potentially is now filled in. You don't really know what it was filled in with. It could be some sort of waste or chemicals or whatever. It could absolutely be anything. So environmental professionals needed to know this sort of thing, and so we were creating these online reports that people could order and help people identify the risks involved in property, in land parcels and things. And as part of doing that, we were using these historical maps for analysis, but we also had a sort of an offshoot where we sold the maps to people who were interested in history. They just wanted a picture of a map that was something that they could put up on their wall and say, oh, that's where my house was, or that's where it is, and that's what it used to look like 100 years ago. And so that was quite a niche little area. It was a sort of a side shoot of the main piece of work that we were doing. But in 2003, our main competitor decided to buy us out, and they had an IT department, and we had an IT department. They didn't need to, so they decided to lay the whole of our IT department off. And so I was given a payoff, which gave me a bit of flexibility, a bit of freedom. Basically thinking, well, I can do something now with this money. I can go out and maybe try my hand at doing something different, something that I've always wanted to do. So I decided to make the leap, and with a couple of colleagues as well, we thought, great, let's do this, because they'd been made redundant as well, and they could actually. We thought, let's partner. It's a good idea. It's sort of safety in numbers. You feel a little bit more secure that there's somebody else doing it with you, that you're not just doing it on your own. And what we decided to do was pretty similar to the offshoot of the historical maps for historians, but we decided to do it for a different country. The maps that the company I worked for had previously, they were maps of England and Wales, and you probably can tell by the accent I'm from the UK. But we saw a niche that there's actually a market for these sorts of maps for Ireland, and there's a lot of interesting genealogy in Ireland. There's probably the majority of you have probably got Irish ancestors. A lot of Americans came over, originated from an Irish family, and so we thought there's a great idea here that we can get out there and sell maps of Ireland for the genealogy market. So that was the idea, and we thought, great, we'll partner up, we'll invest some of our redundancy money in this, all of us, equal partners. We'll just get out there and try and make a go of it. The company that we had originally doing the maps for our old company, for the England and Wales, they would do the fulfillment. They would sell the maps because they were good at doing that. They were in the consumer space. And we thought, well, let's approach them. We'll get them to do Ireland as well. We spoke to them. They said, yeah, it's a good idea. Why not? So we did it. We decided, let's go for it. But the problem was, after a couple of months, this fulfillment agency that we'd actually decided to use decided that it wasn't right for them, that they weren't in that space properly. They couldn't invest the time and effort into a different country. And we actually had to then decide, well, do we give up? Do we throw away all the money that we've just invested in this startup, or do we try and do it ourselves? So we changed tack, and we said, well, let's go for it. We might as well. So from sort of like January 2004 to July 2004, we were working on the product, and we eventually got something to market. But we'd invested an awful lot of our money already. And while we started to make sales of these maps using a web-based interface and all sorts of neat things then, apps weren't around then, there wasn't enough interest. We weren't able or capable of marketing these things enough to get the right level of interest and sales. So effectively by the end of that year, 2004, the company, we'd spent the money, we basically failed. We hadn't achieved what we'd set out to do. But at that stage, I was working for myself. My two colleagues, they'd started to work for themselves or working on behalf of the clients. And so it's sort of, these things happen and you don't really know why or how or where you're going to end up. But it was just an experience that got me on the road to being a contractor, being an independent developer. But it wasn't really how I had originally seen it turn out at all. So really, just to reiterate what we did wrong there, with hindsight, of course, everything's great with hindsight. We didn't have a signed contract with this fulfillment agency that we'd originally spoken to. They hadn't signed anything. There was no commitment from them per se to actually go ahead and do this work. So that's really didn't help us at all. We were sort of relying on them to do the marketing as well. We didn't really have a sales plan either. We just thought, this is a good idea. There's a market out there. We think we can make a go of it. And when things did change, when the information came along that we hadn't really anticipated, we didn't change that sales plan either. And ultimately, we couldn't all commit to the work as well, because there was three of us, but we couldn't all survive for an entire year without being paid or without getting money from elsewhere, and that was another issue. And we didn't have contingency either. And to be perfectly honest, from my perspective, I was probably more interested in the technology of the solution that we were trying to build rather than the actual product and what we were trying to sell to customers. So we didn't really do enough research into the market to start with. So I think that's a pretty key thing to think about. So if you're going to make the leap to being an indie, you've got to think about these things before you do it. Do you want to be a partner? It's comforting being a partner, as I say. They say that there's somebody else in the same boat as you who perhaps you can rely on. But what I would recommend is that you don't partner with a friend, because when things do get really bad, and they will, you can't really have an argument with a friend. You can't dictate to a friend. You've got to, your friendship gets in the way, and certainly over the past 12 years, the experience I've had of people in partnerships, the most successful ones I've seen have been where the partners, they're sort of friends within the office, but they don't socialise afterwards. They go away and they sort of leave the office at 9 o'clock and they go their own separate ways. And when they come back the next day, they can have an argument, they can have a discussion, they can shout at each other. I've seen that happen. But because they're not friends per se, they can do that, and everybody knows it's just a business thing. Whereas if you have a friendship, it's really quite difficult. You may decide to go contract. If partnering with somebody isn't an option for you, if you're going out on your own, there's two good ways of doing it. Either getting a contract, which means in my eyes, a contract is where you will go and work for a customer or a client or a company, probably on a fixed term contract of say 3 to 6 months. But you will be working in their office from 9 to 5 every day. That to me is a contract. If you're freelance, you will probably be working in your own office or from your own home, and you will be working on your terms, and you will just agree a deadline with somebody and say, well, I will deliver this by a certain point, but I won't actually come into your office very often. I may come in once a week, just have a chat, tell you how things are going. But as a freelancer, you've got the freedom then to say, well, actually, I'm going to spend 20 hours a week on this contract or this particular job, but I'll spend another 20 hours a week on another job, or you can split your time however you want to. So that's something to consider as well. And when do you do it? Well, it makes sense that you've got to get that contract, or you've got to get that deal first. But you've got to make sure that whatever you do, you've got to get the signature on the paper before you make the leap. And I've been, as I say, without that really scuppered our original idea. So whether you're partnering, contracting, freelancing, you do need a contract and you need it signed. As I say, if you're going to build a product, this is another option. You could decide, well, actually, I'm going to build a product. That's in a way a less risky thing, because you could probably do that in your spare time while you're doing your normal 9 to 5 job. Make sure you have a business case. There's been a number of talks this week already about how do you get the right product, how do you get your business case set up correctly. Understand who you're marketing your product to, what the sort of target audience is. The sales plan. How much is your product going to cost? How much will it cost to actually build it? When do you think you're going to have the first version ready? All these sorts of things need to be put in and really understood from day one. Otherwise, you're just not really doing it properly, and you will fall foul of something. Will fail completely. But if the other thing as well is be prepared to fail. Be agile. Be quick on your feet. Be very able to take something to market very quickly. Learn from how that particular product is working and change it quickly if you can. Otherwise, again, you're just going to be developing. You may spend 6 months building a product, and then release it and nobody buys it. Why is that? Well, probably because you've not understood the market you're attacking or that you're trying to sell into, and if you try to release something, say in 2 weeks, and you find that there's no traction there, then you can quickly change and do something else for the next 2 weeks, and so on. And gradually you will fine-tune the sort of product that people are willing to pay for or use. If you're contracting or freelancing, you've got to really understand the rates that you're going to charge. As a start, if this is your first time, you've got to be realistic. There's certainly things that you've got to take into account as a freelancer or as a contractor. It's not just a day rate or an hourly rate, times it by 5 for that many number of days a week, and then times it by 52 for that many weeks in a year. You've got to take into account that you're going to need vacation, that you're going to need to train yourself. You've got to set aside some time to do that as well, and that will cost money as well. If you're training yourself, you've got a budget for that. Equally, you may be ill. Hopefully you're not, but it's something you have to factor in. If you're working for yourself, you haven't really. You've got to factor the fact that some days you may not be able to earn any money. So you've really got to make sure of that you understand that, and you take that into account. Again, if overheads, if you aren't able to work from home, if you haven't got a spare bedroom or an office space, or you haven't got an area in the house that you can effectively call your office, then it may cost you some money to rent an office. And that's particularly important if you start employing people as well. You're not going to really want people to come into your house who are effectively strangers. You really need an office. And then there are non-working days. These are days when you actually haven't got any work. If you're a contractor or a freelancer, there will be days when you finish one job and you're still looking for another one. So you've got to factor that in. So that's all sort of making sure that you try and make sure that you understand what you can charge or what you need to charge in order to survive on a normal as an indie. It may be, and this happened to me. I started contracting after my partnership debacle. And I got really quite successful at it, and I had a lot of interest from people and a lot of work coming my way. And I actually started to take on staff. I took on contractors, I took on full-time employees, but I'm now down to myself again. The recession hit in 2009, really hit my workload quite badly. I had employees at the time, and they have to be paid first. And there were a couple of months where I didn't pay myself anything because you take on full-time staff. They're effectively another mouth to feed. There's somebody, they've got families. They're relying on you to pay them at the end of the month. So it is quite a huge responsibility if you do that. Contractors are a little bit easier, but depending on the term of the contract, you may have to give them a certain number of weeks' notice. So that's something you have to factor in as well. And if you get more employees or contractors on board, you've got to feed them. You've got to have the work for them. You don't want them sitting there being non-productive. So ultimately, whilst you wouldn't normally employ somebody or contract somebody to do some work for you if you didn't already have it. You've got to think of the next job, and getting the next job takes time. Somebody's got to do that. That is a responsibility you have to take on yourself. And whilst you may be initially you may be working on your own, and you may be effectively able to do all the coding yourself initially. As you take on people, you've actually got to spend more and more of your time going out and marketing yourself and getting the next job in order to give them work, in order for them to justify their existence. And equally, again, you've got to think really long and hard about what sort of rate you will charge if you start employing somebody as well. Alternatively, you can subcontract out as well, and I would recommend doing that certainly for anything that you feel you're not good at doing. A good example of that for me was design work. I'm great. I'd like to think I'm great at coding, but I'm not a designer. And to subcontract that out is much more cost effective than me spending 4 or 8 hours trying to get a design of an app looking right, when I can subcontract it out to a designer for half the price effectively. So it's certainly worth considering that. And then there's the ongoing thing where you've got a job at the moment. You may have a deadline, say it's 3 months' time. You've got income for 3 months, but you've got to look beyond that. You've got to look at what is the next job that you're going to be doing, and so you've got to factor in time to find the next amount of work. And there was a good talk yesterday. Who was it by? I can't remember his name now. Kirby. By Kirby Turner. He was talking about how to streamline the sales pipeline, to go out and actually get leads, or to use a lead service that he could then use, but he still then had to spend time to qualify the leads and to talk to the people and to write the proposals and to effectively try and make sure that he had something lined up after his current job, after his current role. But in order to do that as well, you've got to go out there and market yourself. You've got to big yourself up. You've got to, get out there and let people know what your skill sets are. So a good example of doing that is to share some of the code that maybe you do. Say if you're very good at doing a particular thing, say you're good at core data, put something on GitHub and share a few example applications with people to say, look, this is the sort of thing I'm really good at doing. And by the way, you can download this and use it if you wish. Get on LinkedIn, tweet. Some people use Facebook. Get out there. You've got to do this all the time if you're going to find the next amount of work. Don't undersell yourself as well. We're probably, well, I'm certainly introvert to a certain extent. It takes a bit of courage to get up here and talk in front of people. But a lot of developers are introverted, and you've got to think long and hard before you actually make the leap into contracting, whether or not you're capable of getting out there and selling yourself and being proactive and pressing the flesh and networking and actually talking to people and being upfront about what it is you do and how you do it and selling yourself. And another good way of maintaining the workload really is to, if you do have once you have got some clients, is to try and keep them as much as possible. Really nurture them, treat them really well, treat them like they're the best thing ever, that you're their biggest friend, because they may not have some work for you next month or the month after, but if they know you've done a good job and that they know you're friendly and approachable, and you keep occasionally reminding them that you are there, chances are that you will get some more work from them. So once you've done a good job with somebody, don't forget about them and go out there and keep in touch with them. Word of mouth does count for a lot, but it shouldn't. Can't rely on it. Certainly, the first couple of years of contracting for me, all of my work was word of mouth. But as I say, at some point, in my case, 2009 with the recession, I actually ran out of work because I wasn't out there marketing myself enough, and I was relying too much on word of mouth. The other thing you can do is specialise. So as I say, if you're good at core data, in my experience, I was good at geographical information systems. So I was trying to sell myself in that sort of area and trying to do online mapping and all that sort of thing. So I was trying to specialise in that. because I could see that as being a really good way of differentiating myself from anybody else. Again, training myself. You've got to go out there. You've got to train yourself as well. You've got to go out and attend training courses. It costs money, but it's worthwhile, and it gives you a chance as well to learn an awful lot more as well. You can't just expect to keep doing the same job in and out, day in, day out all the time. Obviously, we're in this industry. Apple, excuse me, Apple change iOS every year. There's a huge learning curve every year for us, and you've got to set aside time to do that, to get up to date with all the latest trends. And one final point there, a good way of maintaining the workload is to be competitive, and you can only really do that if you're not overcharging, or you're not really we call it taking the mick where we come from, where I am in the UK. It's sort of taking the piss. It's not something that you should even try and do. Be realistic about what you need to survive. Maybe a bit of a margin on there, but don't really, if somebody is desperate for your service, don't say, well, I can charge them an extra $100 a day or something, just because they're desperate to use me. You've got to be professional, and you've got to really keep people on your side, because if you are overcharging or you're taking advantage of a situation, people know about it, and they won't come back to you when they don't need to, when they don't have to. But all of this really, you've got to maintain the work-life balance. You've got to make sure that your work life is separate from your normal life, and I found that the best way to do that is to time box my work. Try to make sure that I only work on client projects for the hours that I'm supposed to be doing. There are occasionally times when I've got to do a little bit more because there may be a big problem that I've got to solve. But again, I wouldn't want to work any later than, say, 10 in the evening, because I know that becomes counterproductive for myself. If I don't get a good night's sleep, I'm not, the following day, I'm just not really going to function properly, and it's completely, it doesn't work. That's my personal experience. And again, this is difficult when you work from home, particularly. But if you have a separate area and that is where you work, do your work there, and then when you leave that area, you're not at work. Just try and make sure that there's some sort of barrier that prevents you from carrying on working while you're at home, and you're supposed to be with your family or your kids. When you've walked away from the desk, you're not working. And then, my kids now, they're grown up, but they knew that when I was at my desk, not to come and approach me or annoy me. But as soon as I left the desk, they could come towards me, and that was fine. That worked out really well. But again, don't worry too much about this. But there will be problems when you are a contractor or a freelancer or an indie. There will be loads. You will mess up, but everybody messes up. Everybody makes mistakes. It happens all the time to everyone. It's just most people don't really acknowledge it, or they don't share that sort of information. It's sort of one of these things that people don't want to admit to, but it happens all the time. Business is hard. It's fulfilling. Things will go wrong, but remember why you became an indie. Yeah. You'll find a way. There will be problems. Take a deep breath. Think about it as any other problem that you may have had in the past. You will solve those problems. Don't really worry too much about it. And there will be highs. You are your own boss. You can earn more money, definitely. There's no more Sunday night dread of, oh my God, I've got to go into work tomorrow morning. I hate that place. You're in control. You can do what you want. And you can generally pick and choose what you want to work on. Once you got into the groove and you got into ways of finding the next piece of work. Again, Kirby touched on this yesterday. You know, he effectively had a number of stages where if something wasn't right, if for example they weren't willing to pay over $25,000 for a job, he would just not even entertain it anymore. Once he found that information out, it wasn't worth anything to him. It was too much work. It wasn't really, So he could pick and choose. He got to a state where he could decide what he wanted to work on. And yeah, you will learn a lot. You definitely. In the process, you'll learn a lot about yourself. You'll learn a lot about the capabilities you have, and it's a really good learning process. So it sort of leads me on to finally what happened with the maps. So after a year of hard work on these things, what happened? Well, with hindsight, and this is sort of like 11 years hindsight now. I'm certainly not going to beat myself up about it, because I think I learned an awful lot from that experience. We did things right, we did things wrong, but we were agile, and we did try and change tack when we realised that things weren't going right. We kept the website running. We had to do the fulfillment ourselves. We actually had to go out and buy big plotters in order to print the maps, and we had to roll them up and post them ourselves and do all that sort of thing. That none of that was in the original idea of how we were going to run this thing. But ultimately, it was a cottage industry. There were 3 of us, but there was probably only enough work for one of us to really pay for one person. But we kept it running. We just did it part time in our evenings whenever we could. But after 10 years, we'd all gone our separate ways. We really hadn't done much with it. It was beginning to look dated, and it would have taken a lot more investment in redoing the website and maybe doing a mobile version and all that sort of stuff. And we really didn't have the time or inclination to do it, because we decided that there wasn't a market there, or not something that we could actually tap into. But in the end, we managed to sell all the data that we captured. We captured all the historical maps of Ireland. We had a competitor who really wanted those maps, and they actually paid us 3 times what we originally invested in the work. So we tripled our money. What we created was actually worth something to somebody at least. And we learned a lot along the way. And that, I'm afraid, is that. Thank you.